Homemade truffles are basically, you know, that's chocolate, heavy cream, but made at home, the texture can be really dense and kind of grainy. So I'm going to show you a whole lot better way to produce nice melt-in-your-mouth, succulent, store-bought looking truffles. Well, can't make truffles without the chocolate. And we're using bittersweet chocolate. And Ghirardelli is actually the brand that we're going to start off with. So we're using 12 ounces of Ghirardelli chocolate. Now, we want to break this chocolate up into nice, even shards, and that's because they're going to melt evenly. What we found was by melting the chocolate first and stirring the ganache as little as possible, we could get rid of most of that grainy texture. I'm going to put this right in the microwave. And we're going to melt this over medium heat. Now that's about a level 5 setting here for 2 to 3 minutes. And the time will fluctuate depending on your microwave. So we'll start at 2 minutes. It's a good idea to go in there and stir it once or twice. All right, so the chocolate is mostly melted. There's 1 or 2 little bits in there that are yet to melt, and that is perfect. All right, so we've got our heavy cream. Now I also want to heat this up, and this is a ½ cup of heavy cream, but we're just gonna heat it up until it's slightly warm, just warm to the touch, and that's only gonna take about 30 seconds. Okay, so I mentioned before that we don't want to keep stirring the ganache because all that aeration will cause the ganache to break. So we're going to add most of our flavorings to the heavy cream first. So I'm gonna start off with a ½ teaspoon of vanilla extract and a pinch of salt. And instead of sugar, I'm going to add corn syrup. And this is 2 tablespoons of corn syrup. So it's going to help to lighten up that too dense chocolate ganache mixture. So we're just going to mix this up. Dissolves instantly. Now we're just going to pour this right over the chocolate mixture. Now I'm not going to mix this yet. I just want to let this sit here for about 3 minutes. And keep the plastic on there, and we're gonna let that incorporate on its own for a few moments. Now, when it comes to shaping the truffles, there are a few different ways that people do it. One thing is they'll make the ganache and they'll refrigerate it for a little while, let it set up until it's semi-soft, semi-hard, and then they'll pipe it out in a piping bag. Well, that's really messy, and you lose half of the ganache to the piping bag. Another way to do it is, again, you want to par-chill the ganache, and then you scoop it out with either the large side of a melon baller or a tiny little ice cream scoop. That is a nightmare. You're constantly having to get your fingers in there to get the ganache out. It's just way too messy. This is an 8-inch square baking dish, and I've gone ahead and lightly greased it. We're going to make a mold for our ganache. And we found this technique in an Alice Medrick book, which we have over there for you. She's Ms. Chocolate. She is Ms. Chocolate, and she came up with this great idea of making a chocolate mold. So, just want to take a sheet of parchment and fold it so it's about the same size as the bottom of the pan. All right, and I'll do the same with this one. So we put one in. We're basically just fitting the pan so that later on, after the ganache is firmed up, we can lift it right out. The pan's all prepared. I'll just put it aside for a second and get back to that chocolate mixture. All right. Just going to take a spoon and start to stir this mixture in. Nice and gentle. I'm not trying to whisk it or incorporate too much air. It goes from looking ugly to amazing. So our ganache is almost done, but here's our second ingredient that we're going to add to give it a little bit of a lighter texture, and that's butter. It's 1½ tablespoons of unsalted butter. Well, you know, the problem was with ganache is we tried to add more and more cream to lighten it up, at least lighten the texture. I'm not talking about calories. But, you know, it's too sloppy to scoop out and make nice truffles. So we wanted something that when it was refrigerated, it would become nice and solid. And butter is the answer. So I'm adding them at this point because we want the butter to retain its kind of creamy state. We don't want it to melt and make the ganache greasy. Last one in. I'm going to pour it right into the baking dish. All right, so just want to make sure that it's in a nice, even layer. Typically, at this point, we would take the ganache and put it in the fridge, cool it down until it was nice and firm, and we could shape the little truffles. Well, the problem with that is that rapid cooling actually caused the ganache to become quite grainy, and that's the problem with homemade truffles. So instead, we're going to let this sit here on the counter for 2 hours before we put it in the fridge, and we found that that pretty much eliminated all the graininess. All right, Chris, so the ganache is all set up and we're ready to form into our 64 little truffles. So we're just making a nice cocoa exterior. This is a cup of Dutch processed cocoa. Put it right into our sieve here. Now to cut this, we're going to add a little bit of powdered sugar or confectioner's sugar. This is a 1/4 cup, goes right in there because cocoa on its own can be way too bitter. So that little bit of 10X or confectioner sugar is really going to cut that bitterness. Strain it right through there, because sometimes you get these big, giant pieces of cocoa. You don't want that on the exterior of our lovely homemade truffles. We don't want anybody to know that these are homemade, right? So don't tell.
No, you do, because when you give them to someone, you want them to know.
I made that.
You love them, and you're giving them your work and effort.
Wow.
Isn't that nice?
That's why I never got any from you.
Probably.
All right, so now we want to sieve this again into our cake pan because we're going to use this to coat the truffles. So now, here's the ganache. And just gonna pull this up by the sling. So I'm gonna start off by scoring this. So I'll score it into quarters and then eighths. Same this way. All right, so I'm gonna cut off this first row here. I'm gonna cut this right into the 8 pieces. Now to shape these into little balls, the first thing I want to do is coat my hands with some of the cocoa mixture. That way the chocolate won't stick too much. And we want to shape these squares into balls. So what we're going to do is kind of pinch this mixture into a rough ball. And there we go. Just dump it right into the pan when we're done. And roll them and shake them in the cocoa mixture. Just like that. All right, now I want to shake away the excess cocoa. Just going to drop these right into the container, and this is a refrigerator container, nice and airtight. We're actually going to continue to roll out and coat these truffles, and then we're going to have to refrigerate them for 2 hours or up to a week. All right, Chris, the truffles have set up. They were in the fridge for 2 hours, and I let them sit out here for 5 to 10 minutes so they could soften up just enough, but it is time to taste them.
You know, this is one of the few times in the kitchen you don't really have to say anything.
I know,
you could just
zip it, Bridget. I'm going to eat it, right?
Very good. So that doesn't have that grainy, heavy thing.
No, super silky.
I think I'll have another.
Very intense. See, that's the great thing about small. You can have 8, nobody else. And you can trick yourself into thinking that you ate just little bites.
So it turns out there were quite a few secrets to homemade truffles. We used corn syrup, butter, and the melted chocolate. We made that ganache, but we let it cool down at room temperature for a couple hours. And the final thing is we did it in squares and rolled them in our hands, so it made it very easy to shape. So there you have it. From America's Test Kitchen to your kitchen, an incredibly easy version of homemade chocolate truffles.